Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the second webinar of VB 2021, Hong Kong Collateral events titled Redistribution, Land, People and Environment. I'm Daneil, one of your curators of VB 2021 and your moderator tonight. We also have other curators today, Paul and Agnes from Bread Studio, KS from Hong Kong U, and our Chief Curator, Mr. Donald Choi, is also joining later tonight. COVID-19 series are the monthly webinars we curated, which we aim to explore the relevance of the current phenomenon with our curatorial theme redistribution, our exhibitors and their provocative exhibits, and also to utilize this as a platform to facilitate dialogue between our knowledgeable speaker, talented exhibitors and curators. Well, a bit more on our upcoming plans of VB. It is postponed for 1 year as of today, and it is scheduled to open in Venice next year, May 2021. Before Venice, apart from the series of webinar, we are now making the first ever VB exhibition in Hong Kong in virtual reality format. Probably we will publish it in November. In L'Hotel Nina at Convention Center in Tsuen Wan, all the exhibits will be displayed in each of the hotel rooms on one floor, similar to the hotel art fair type of exhibition. We must thank our gold sponsor, L'Hotel Group, who generously reserved half a floor for us in L'Hotel, and will map all those rooms on the floor in virtual reality, so we can browse the virtual exhibition anytime, anywhere. As also at the beginning of 2021, we'll start the year with a collaborative event with City Gallery next to City Hall, where all the Venice exhibits will be pre-exhibited in that venue physically. This would also mark the reopening of City Gallery. Well, as you know, VB 2021, we facilitate the collaboration of architects and designers from different role and different experience and different sector. So 3 smaller teams will work together as a bigger group to create an exhibit from scratch to respond to the main theme redistribution. Today, we have invited one of the group who are formed from 3 smaller teams from different fields. On the academic side, we have the PolyU School of Design. We have Associate Professor Mr. Peter Hasdell. We have Associate Professor Gerhard Bruyns, School of Design, PolyU. And we also have Assistant Professor Daneil Elkin here. And as the young architect counterpart, we have Caroline Chou and Kelvin Lim from OPENUU, a very young architect firm. As another architect category, veteran and experienced, we have Frank Leung and Irene Lai from VIA Architects.
Hello.
Last but not least, we have our honorable speaker, Joe Chan, Director and Architect of PNT, who is a very experienced and knowledgeable architect in the field with extensive experience in our trade. So for today's sub-theme, we have Hong Kong, the most expensive city to dwell in. Well, Hong Kong is known for the expensiveness to dwell, particularly with the scarcity of land and the price of a home. Today, we will explore how redistribution of various resources, land, people, environment could address these issues in our future. Well, let's begin with our main theme, redistribution of land. I believe our guest speaker, Joe, has prepared something to share with us on this topic, right?
Yeah.
Joe, please take the floor.
Okay. I hope I can contribute as a practicing architect and urban designer for 30 years in Hong Kong. So first, I will start with some sharing of some basic facts. So now we were told Hong Kong is, since my childhood, as 地少人多. So in English, it's limited land for a huge population. So, but is it true? Are we really short of land, or we just short of creativity in the way of using our land? So the first question I would like to bring out is, are we really short of land? So this is important because we always heard people saying we are short of land in Hong Kong. So now these two circles is two international city, a metropolitan city in the world. So one city on the left is has a developed area of 30%, but almost 70% of that is keeping still as a natural landscape form. But on the right side is another city, also international city, but is 70% developed, only remaining 20 to 30% of natural reserve area. So many years I have been thinking that Hong Kong, we always say, is a concrete jungle and a lot of people, and we live in a dense environment. So until sometime I realized that in about 10, 20 years ago, so I realized actually Hong Kong actually is something like this. Instead of on the right, is on the left. So we actually only develop 30% of our land. And compared to the right, actually is Singapore. So Singapore gives us the impression that it's a garden city. Oh, it's full of natural landscape. But in fact, they all have a developed area of 70%. Only a few portion of the land is still remaining as a natural reserve. So if you look at the figure in closer detail, the actually in terms of land area per person, we actually have more land per person in Hong Kong compared to Singapore. But in terms of the developed area, we have much less, almost just half. So looking into further details, are we really short of land? You see in the top left photos is an aerial photo into Hong Kong, and actually there's a lot of area that we have not touched upon. So a lot of greeneries, and if you look at the further closer detail in the right, this is a further breakdown of the developed area, so-called 25% of our land developed. You notice that actually for private residential, we have an impression that we have a lot of land actually on private residential is just 2.3%. So that's a lot of public housing. We can see actually it's only 1.5% of our land area. So this gives a much clearer picture of what actually is the current situation. And one thing to notice is we did spend a lot of land on transport and road. If you can see here, road and transport facilities, it's almost double the land we spend on public and also private residential. So there's something, this is a fact that we sometimes not realize actually how we are using our land in the current situation. So in previously, a few years ago, there is a study conducted by the Hong Kong government, and they have used previous data and also project the future land use requirement. They have come up with the conclusion that with all this land that we are now currently available, we are still shortfall of the land of 1,200 hectares. Is equivalent about 60 Victoria Park. But actually, all this appears to be a lot, but in fact, it's only 1% of all the land in Hong Kong. So the question is, we short of land, or whether it's a matter of the topics of this webinar, whether it's a matter of redistribution and redistribution of the use, redistribution of the land, rather than actually we are short of land and need to produce further land by other different methods. So I have coming few slides showing you some basic facts I think to just facilitate the discussion tonight. So in terms of agricultural land, is until you see this figure, you probably don't realize actually we have 80% of our agricultural land is actually abandoned, and it's equivalent to 3,700 hectares. And most of them actually are in the hand of private developer, and there's no fixed time to use that until someone put it into the applications to the town planning board. So of course, there's been discussion in the society whether we should set, instead of all this land just left unused and not utilized, should we set a sunset policy to give a deadline of all this land supposed to be agricultural land? Is we are not using that as agricultural land anymore? Why it has to be like that? So should we have a deadline to set for that? So there's a possibility. And then brownfield site, I think you heard a lot in the newspaper. So we are dealing with some by rezoning, by planning department redrawing the outline zoning plan, but there's still a lot of land still not yet decide how to deal with it, like the photos that you see, all these operations. How should we deal with it? Where should it go? And it actually would release a substantial amount of land. And then another, there is also another surprising figure that you can realize is in the government planning, they often assume we have to allow this figure. You see 5 meter square per person for planning for roads compared to other open space and GIC. So you can imagine that actually the current way of redesigning a city, we go actually design for cars somehow more than people. So this is highly undesirable. And one bad example you can see actually is the West Kowloon reclamation. It's not just too far ago, it's about 20 something, 30 years ago. So we did reclaim a big, huge piece of land, but over 50% of those land actually did goes to road. And you can see this Yaomate exchange, interchange, and they actually bisect the cities and actually deter people from going to the coastline and also occupy a lot of land. So if you compare the left and the right, you can see actually if you have a better design in the first instance, you have those roads sunken or designed in such a way that you can build on top. You can actually house almost the entire Taikoo Shing. Other opportunity. So we haven't explored is underground space, a lot of opportunity in Victoria Park and Kowloon Park, and also Quarry Bay, Causeway Bay, etc. And also those infrastructure of occupying a lot of land, like the Kwai Ching terminal, container terminal. Because of history, they are there, but they are occupying a precious piece of land. Should they be relocated to somewhere else? So that is also something that we can discuss and see whether there's a better way of dealing with that. And there's also GIC facilities, recreation facilities that we have a lot of those private recreation club in every part of Hong Kong. But in fact, should all these facilities be better located in better locations? For example, in the periphery of the city, and maybe the edge of the country park or the greenbelt area, and just vacate the land for other more meaningful use. So this is something we could all consider. And also GIC facilities now is a very old-fashioned way of planning. Government allocate lands to different functions. For example, LCSD use, police use, fire service use, etc. So, but could that be better coordinate into a multi-purpose GIC facilities could release a big number of very variable sites in town. The last one, but this is also a very huge figure. You may notice a lot of those village houses. In fact, it's not just in the rural area. It's right in the middle of the town. You can see some actually located in Hun Tong, Wong Tai Sin, and the photos show here is a Typo market, Typo station. It's right next to the MTR station. There's a huge stretch of village house. So currently the density is a 3-story building. So if we can intensify that into 6 stories, say for example, we can almost release over 1,000 hectares for other purpose. So all this is a facts that whether we are really using our land resource in a clever, creative way. So I'll just stop here and let the exhibitor to go through the exhibit with us.
Right. Thank you, Chou, for your inspiring presentation. There are a few interesting points and facts you have shared with us. We'll discuss after we have seen exhibitors' response to the main redistribution theme afterwards. And stay tuned, because I think Chou has a second half of his seminar to share with us today about today's topic. Peter, hi, you're muted.
Yes.
Hi, Peter. Can you tell us more about your group's exhibit and in response to the main theme redistribution?
Yes. Can you see the Hong Kong Squared spatial visions?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. First of all, myself, Gerhard, and Daneil, we all trained as architects, and then Gerhard, for instance, did his postgraduate PhD in urbanism. I am also architect and urbanist. We teach in the School of Design in PolyU, and as a part of that, part of our research, but also part of our teaching program, teaching graduate students, master's students in design, or specifically in urban environmental design. Myself and Gerhard have been running a program for a number of years, looking at a sort of speculative vision of Hong Kong, not just Hong Kong, but also future urbanism or urban issues within the Greater Bay Area as well. At the moment, we have stage 2 of this project going on, which is, I briefly will change screens for a moment, which is connected with the TU Delft in the Netherlands, looking at the wider issues of future development in the Greater Bay Area. So refer you to this website if you're interested as well. Coming back to what we have done a few years ago, Daneil also helped us with the development of this whole set of ideas, in particular for the Venice Biennale. So our students, we wanted them to line up with our particular research. In particular, my research has been looking at the Hong Kong-Shenzhen border, and Gerhard's research has been looking at, amongst other things, 3-dimensional or urban morphology, 3-dimensional density within Hong Kong, and how we can actually understand and value a different model of urban development in this case. So for our work, research work and teaching work as presented here, we call it Hong Kong Squared. This means, in effect, a potential doubling as a hypothetical scenario of Hong Kong. Now, this can mean doubling in many ways, because it can mean doubling in terms of area, physical area, It can mean doubling in terms of density or programmatic doubling or something else like this, right? We all know that we live in a very tight individual footprint. So everyone's spatial area is much less than in the mainland China and in other parts of the world. So this may also be interpreted as a sort of living condition as well. But what we wanted to do was present this as a speculative scenario. So this is called Hong Kong Squared Spatial Visions Beyond 2030. As some of us know, those of us in the planning field, we know there's a kind of active plan which is called Hong Kong 2030 Plus. We use this as a reference, but also use this to speculate beyond the 2030 document. So as I mentioned, Hong Kong Squared is a series of scenarios and spatial strategies that question how and in what ways Hong Kong SAR as a territory, in this case, will develop. Particularly given the rapid changes we've seen over the past 40 years across the border. And then how can Hong Kong either become something very strategic or even potentially integrate, and in what kind of ways we can do that. So we set this as a very speculative, scenario-driven series of spatial propositions to a series of graduate students or master's level students to look at Hong Kong in the next 50 years or beyond. So while we don't go down into highly detailed urban planning and percentages of green space versus residential versus commercial, we use this nonetheless as a tool to develop 5 different spatial propositions, which I will only go into very, very generally to keep within the time frame. So what this does is extrapolate specific tendencies within Hong Kong, within Hong Kong's recent history, for instance, the new town developments or the reclamation aspects over the past 30, 40 or 50 years that have led to particular patterns in Hong Kong, but also to imagine what's possible ways they can go further. Picking up on some of Joel's comments, you know, it actually fits quite well with that kind of thing. Asking the question, how could Hong Kong become competitive or active or remain a major player within this increasing Greater Bay conurbation or integration that's going to happen. So these proposed scenarios focus on 3 key things. There are other aspects to this, but 3 different general possibilities, and 5 different morphological approaches. So the first one is here is a monocentric territory. Now we know that Hong Kong has, for instance, one CBD, more or less, 1.5, let's say, because Kowloon Bay is developing into what they call CBD2. But we also know that in many cases, you know, given the size of Shenzhen across the border now, the center of gravity of a lot of those things may be, depending on the sector or the industry, may be pulled closer towards the border or towards new infrastructures such as the Macau Bridge Airport cluster as well. But there are other opportunities within this that means that we can actually
really hungry.
We can actually also investigate what those things are. We can speculate of future issues in much as you can see that the government is doing, whether it's misguided or not, with proposed new islands just off Lantau. Part B is polycentric node. In other words, that Hong Kong or its subcenters exist as a series of different nodes within the Greater Bay Area, allowing for specific expertise or specialization to happen in those in the wider agglomeration urban agglomeration. I mean, Greater Bay Area would in fact be a kind of urban agglomeration of well over 60 million people. Some estimate up to about 90 or 100 million. And see how an increase in population as a speculative thing might impact Hong Kong's formal expression. In other words, how and where, as Joel pointed out, do we fill in things, or do we concentrate, for instance, on intensifying the edges once the harbour disappears, once other things happen like this? What are the possibilities of this to do that? And the production of such approaches, we think, is highly relevant to spatial planning, but in some ways, our particular point of view of this is that certain models of spatial planning, which tend to focus on the sort of centralized city and its peripheries, its edges, and so on, need to be questioned again, how and in what ways we begin to plan for new forms of city, for instance, very, very large urban conditions, cross-border issues, and so on. In the same way that perhaps Europe, once it looked at European Union integration, cities started to have to plan for cross-border things involving, let's say, urban development that spans between two countries there, or something like this. This involves for us the opportunity to develop scenarios, to play out these opportunities, and then to look at these things on a series of very, very different scales. We also asked our students, as part of their research, to project certain kind of fantasies in the same way that MVRDV did, to imagine very speculative propositions or gameboarding processes, in other words, that they can play out different scenarios without feeling that they're constrained by existing urban methodologies. So this is part of the way we approach this. Part of that's very academic, I know, but in a way then we are looking at the practice of urban planning and also trying to critique that and say that it needs to extend further to be able to find new ways to be able to plan for such complex futures. Within our group of researchers, students, what we did was 5 different scenarios. So these are based on initial territorial analysis with the scenario that myself and Gerhard said, which is the doubling of Hong Kong from 7 million maybe to 14, or with if that's within amount of livable area that people have, usable area. So scenario 1 was to import a certain kind of morphological thing which divides up the city into very, very small little grids of different functions that we can then mix and match these in a new way. So it's no longer zoning according to that's just a zone for offices or that's a zone for residential. But we start to mix this up, which critiques, let's say, the new towns of places like Sha Tin and so on. Second one was to divide the Hong Kong territory into something what we called strip city. In other words, recognizing that the center of gravity might move in the future towards the border with Shenzhen and increasing integration along infrastructure lines, and how we can then begin to plan this in a very, very different way. The scenario 3 looked at something we call the ring city, which deals with sort of polycentric kind of different nodes. Maybe some of them in the case of this little example, you can't really see in this case, but we would suggest different nodes happening within the new territories in places like Tuen Mun, Yuen Long, and so on. These are, in our view, beginning to happen already, but those city centers are sort of subservient to the greater forces that happen either in Shenzhen or Hong Kong. Scenario 4 looks at something we call the radial city that looks at, again, imposition of new nodes within the new territories, for instance, and then east-west integration across to places like Zhuhai through new bridges, infrastructure systems, railway systems that link back into the Greater Bay Area. And finally, scenario number 5, which is the linear city, which in this case, the attitude developed was to just look at the edges, the water edges of Hong Kong and surrounding all the islands, to say that that's the development focus for that version of Hong Kong Square. So each different one then, based on the research, then develop these 5 different scenarios for this. If you're interested, we're happy to provide you with more information. So this is just a teaser in this case. One of these that we selected for exhibition was this one called the Pointless City. And we just choose a little part of this. A tiny bit about this scenario was that we eventually choose a scenario based on increasing education and expertise in Hong Kong and the development of these things, you know, like UST, like higher level research, like service economy and so forth, to activate some kind of specialization within Hong Kong that can then provide a competitive advantage for Hong Kong in relation to various cities across the border in mainland China that are more based on production and so forth. So this would mean that then Hong Kong, the vision for this would be that Hong Kong then ends up as a much more intensively research, university-oriented or industry-led research whole city approach within this. And then these little colored blocks would then allow a certain kind of development to happen in this way. So without explaining any more about that, then this approach simply just choose a part of this as the base for our combined model exhibition, which is like this, like a ground, perhaps for the some of the ideas that the other 2 groups happen. So clearly there is much more to say about each individual approach, but at the moment, this just stands in for how can we take this very precious little pieces of land that's counted by square meters and then begin to understand its future possible value, not only as housing, not only as commercial or finance-driven offices, but as other functions that we can then question what the planning approach is, but also question the future character of the city itself. I think that that's it. So thank you very much. These are links that the top link is just to our school. The deltamegaregions.net is to continuing research that we're doing with TU Delft on the Greater Bay Area, which will continue also this year. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Peter. Well, the work is definitely quite provocative and interesting. For all the participants today, don't worry, we'll be featuring Peter and his work further in our social media, so stay tuned. Because I'm sure I think most of us would be very interested to know more about School of Design PolyU's work and their exhibitions work as well, and we can access them through our social media sites. Caroline and Calvin, how do you team work together with Peter's exhibit, and how do you guys respond to the main theme?
So hi everybody. So I think for us, we worked pretty well together as a whole team. So basically just a brief explanation of how our 3 teams work together, or 3 groups work together within the team. So as we move up, we basically move up in scale as well. So we started with Peter and PolyU looking at the city more on a larger scale. And then we have kind of picked a district, Central to be specific, which we'll talk a little bit more about, because that's kind of, that's where we've moved our office to in the past couple of years. So we're kind of more familiar with the Central Sheungwan area. So that's where we chose. And then when it moves up to VIA Architects, they have chosen more specific development. So it really goes.
Kelvin, you are like in the middle layer, right, in your exhibit?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So so we've kind of looked at with some of the issues that are happening, but we because we are talking about land. So with Hong Kong, I think very reality that there's a flooding concern. So as the, with global warming and the sea levels rising, actually by 2050, you would see that basically what was done in the past 80 years or so with the reclamation will be pretty much destroyed at that point. A lot of harborfront will actually so because Central actually has a lot of built up areas over the years. And as the years move on, as you see in the previous slide, you'll see more and more of that area will be covered. And as Joel already touched upon, kind of the area that's been built up in Hong Kong, Hong Kong has a very small area that's really been built up. The rest are all, reserves or conservation areas. So it's not really touched upon. But based on what we have available, I think there are many opportunities that could be done to really increase the limited supply of land that we have in Hong Kong. And as you can see, obviously, as Hong Kong takes over more and more of its harbor, we are slowing down on the reclamation, and we are seeing, what reclamation does to kind of the surrounding areas, especially the ecology of the harbor. Obviously, it's not friendly, but it does give Hong Kong more land. So we've kind of gone to explore, as I mentioned, we are looking at Central, and we're studying really the bridge system. So just as a comparison, a typical bridge in Hong Kong is about 80 square meters in area that it covers. So as you can see, it takes up, not even 4 parking spots in this comparison with a parking lot. And actually Hong Kong has a lot of these elevated walkway systems that we've looked at. And, in particular, because as I mentioned, we are in Central, we've kind of chosen the Central elevated bridge walkway system to really look into it. But basically this we're envisioning can be applied to, all these different districts where there are elevated walkways. And this is slightly kind of inspired from Venice, seeing the Rialto Bridge. It is a bridge that actually is occupied. It's not just a bridge for the purpose of connecting 2 points, but it actually has a program within the bridge itself. And so just to kind of go a little bit more into what we plan for the programs, just a comparison of what typically happens if you live, elsewhere. Obviously in Hong Kong, a lot of these are kind of reversed because we do live very close to the city. But in a lot of places where you live and where you work is actually quite a distance. And as you move out the countryside, the farther you go, there's more countryside. But in Hong Kong, countryside is, for some people, it's literally next door. So a lot of these notions are broken down in Hong Kong, especially for entertainment and retail. Again, depending on where you live, these could be literally below you in some cases if you live above an MTR station. So we kind of, stemming from the pointillist city, we've actually started looking at Hong Kong from these many years. And we actually looked at the history of Hong Kong through these layers, these bricks or tiles that were created throughout the years. And as you kind of go through the years, the tile sizes changes, the typology and the material changes. And we thought that was pretty interesting. So this was kind of our first interpretation of the Central elevated walkway. So this is kind of the central harbor front, and as you move up, IFC, and then going up towards the mid-levels escalator up there. So to kind of break it down, we've kind of explored in different years what buildings and which bridges were built. And as you can see, you know, Hong Kong really developed throughout these years, and with the bulk of the development going on in the 90s, and then kind of starting to slow down again in 2000, just because of the amount of land that's been built up already. So we are seeing a slowdown because of that purpose here. And this, as you know, because it is kind of a study of Hong Kong, we actually explored these, and the representation, as you can see, is also the color of our money in Hong Kong, you know, with 10s, 20s, 50s, 100s, and 1,000 represented. So this kind of plays along with, you know, Hong Kong being an expensive city. So we wanted to really represent Hong Kong, well, with the expensive living, with kind of currency and tying it more to the color of our bills. And so kind of how we've broken this down, because as I mentioned, there are a lot of inspiration from Rialto Bridge, but another inspiration is also from in Canada, Montreal. If anybody have been there, Montreal, it's a cold city, you know, half the time of the year. And so there are a lot of these bridging systems, underground walkways that are all programmed so that it really fills up the city, and it's not just a connection from point A to point B to stay out of the cold, but as you're walking from point A to point B, there are also these other programs that you could interact with as you're walking through. So we've kind of taken that idea and really want to try to implement, you know, in some of these existing bridges in Hong Kong, or even new bridges that would be built in the future. You know, especially in Central, you'll walk through, you know, the elevator walkway, especially the one connecting from IFC towards the mid-levels escalators. At certain parts of it, it's really, really wide. And especially on weekends, you'll see a lot of domestic helpers actually occupying majority of the bridge, and yet you can still walk on it. So it actually, with people occupying it, it doesn't actually block all the traffic. So we really wanted to adapt what, you know, Central already has to offer, some of these wider bridges. Why not put in some programs that could really alleviate some of the limited space that we have in Hong Kong? For example, playgrounds. You know, when we were younger, there were playgrounds, you know, in a lot of city blocks, you'll find playgrounds. But as time goes on, you know, a playground isn't a revenue generating piece of land. So again, you know, those are taken over and potentially have a small development or combined with other lands to really get a larger piece of development. But as kids nowadays, you know, they really have to travel a little bit just to get to a playground to really experience, you know, the joy of being a kid. You know, that's one instance. Or, you know, for some people that are, you know, for offices, for example, you know, even a co-working space isn't always readily available, but, you know, in these spaces, why not turn some of them into play areas, some of them into work areas? So we really wanted to reintroduce a lot of these elements that already exist throughout the city, but why not bring it into one space, which in our case is an elevator walkway. You know, we don't need to build additional bridges to house all these programs, but we could actually use what's already existing and build upon them. You know, this is just a hypothetical exploration. So, you know, we've kind of built, you know, maybe one level up from the bridge if it's required to kind of gain a little bit more. But then in some cases, you'll see, you know, a lot of these old Hong Kong elements being brought back. For example, if you look on the bottom left, we have this, it used to be called Fege Lam. It's what people, you know, living up above, that's how they would order their snacks sometimes. You know, these are just sellers that kind of walk along the road and kind of throw you your snacks after you pay them. So, you know, why not bring back some of these playful elements that used to exist in Hong Kong, and, you know, parks and all these. So we really wanted to try to create a space within Hong Kong that houses these different elements. So it's really kind of combining what's becoming the new trend, which is co-living, co-working, but really bringing all those elements into one space. So co-living, co-working, cohabitat, everything is within this space. And that's kind of what we've explored. So this is just a rendering. So please visit El Hotel when the exhibition is up.
Right, thank you, Kevin and Caroline. Well, very interesting ideas. Somehow, I think together with Peter's proposal, yours and Peter's already offering hypothetical answers, solutions to what Joe has pointed out about the redistribution of land. And according to your exhibit's concepts, the next layer that we are going to see from VIA architects Frank Leung and Irene, I think the next level would be a smaller scale, right? So the scale would be going smaller on the toppest level of the exhibits.
Yes. Hi, are you seeing the screen?
Yes.
All right. So yeah, I mean, we started, I mean, it was a really great pleasure working with PolyU team as well as Kevin and Caroline. And these are some of the shots. All right, you seeing it? You see the full screen now? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so here's the intention of the original exhibit. If it were to happen in Venice, it's a tower containing 3 layers, and it's because I think PolyU's team had an urban scale, and Kevin's team chose to explore kind of a vicinity. We kind of further zoom into a particular project, a particular plot, where the visitors can actually climb a couple of steps to actually get a eye-level view of a project that we're actually working on in Hong Kong. So these are some shots that we submitted to the Biennale team. And the project that we're sharing is what we call Living Courtyard. We, you know, fit to the title here about redistribution. We work a lot with private residential development, and because of the prices and because of the pressure that of kind of the buyers, we end up dealing with units that are quite small, and so the exploration here is to say, what can we do to the communal space that are shared by residences? And I know a lot of people will call them clubhouses, but in this particular case, you can see on the top part, this is our piece of the exhibit and a shot of it from the top. In our case, it is a courtyard space. The project is in Yuen Long, in a sort of a new territories area where there is already heritage of living in a kind of co-living kind of way. So we really wanted to take the chance to create a communal space for residences in this project that mimics the kind of traditional way of living. So it's a number of functions surrounding a courtyard, and as you can see from the model, and we'll explore a little bit more about the material interpretation. Here is a shot of the project that we're working on. Very happy to work, in fact, with AGC architects, who are the overall architects of the project. We really handle the clubhouse portion. Earlier on, we have already, as a team, decided to work with heritage language and materials. And when we started to look at the clubhouse, we really wanted to look back on this kind of communal living, that you have a shared space and a number of activities revolving around it, which the archetypal example is the traditional courtyard house, where you have wings of different activities, you have a point of entry, and then you all share a common space where everybody can have kind of a breathing space as well as kind of social activities. We took the plan, and the project is actually perceived by us as a number of layers. The first layer of arrival, which is designed with a landscape court to arrive, what traditionally called the Yingbik, the shadow wall, which is actually the really the inner facade of the entire project that, number one, kind of stops everybody and also redirect people to the next layer, which is the kind of main living spaces of this clubhouse. But then there are other functions that are string around different areas of the club surrounding a central pool, which is what makes this courtyard space intimate and also a place for sharing. So you could see on the upper part here, there are some sort of dining pavilions, and there's a gym, and there are kids facilities, landscape areas, so on, that surrounds the entire scheme. Which by not having a singular interior volume, we're able to create indoor-outdoor relationship. Lots more choices in terms of experiencing the space, a lot more choices to combine and use the spaces separately. A lot more choices for individuality, different age groups, and so on and so forth. And the other element that we have to tackle is because the entire landscape is really the base of the entire residential tower. So each of these pavilions are actually designed to be giant tree pits or flower pots. So when you're looking from the tower into the courtyard, you're really seeing landscape, you're not seeing buildings. And that's also very important to create a kind of a green, sustainable communal space for the residents. Here is a diagram of the actual project and how the different elements are interpreted. And we've given, again, in taking a nod to the heritage approach, we've actually given every function a Chinese word that signifies a particular function in that space. But that's really spatial arrangement, and we felt in every project we create, we really wanted it rooted to the location for the function as well as find its soul. And in this case, it's really the material. Where we explored, of course, a number of ways to actually execute these buildings, and we came up with bricks and a combination of stone and timber combination. But the biggest thing is brick. The other thing that we wanted to instill into the design is this idea of light. In a traditional kind of farmer's life, the light is really important throughout the day, where you have different qualities of light guiding you through activities throughout the day. So the Chinese saying goes, so you actually follow the sun. And with that, we created a interior design palette that follows the colors created by different times of the day. I won't go into the individual spaces and renderings and so on, because those are all kind of first-hand sales restricted material. But these are the sort of guiding principles that guide us through different areas. And as you can see, an application of the different hues throughout the different functions of this scheme. So it's not just the form, but in the kind of spirit, we're using a very kind of traditional way of looking at the world to design this space. Of course, brick is at the center of creating and kind of drawing the heritage roots to this particular project. My team and the construction team spent a lot of effort studying ways of using or reusing Tianjun, that's sort of the Chinese brick. And not only just how to actually do it when it's flat or turn the corner, we really wanted to do something that has a certain level of porosity that actually modernizes the brick. So these are some of the studies that we've done, mock-ups that we have done numerous times of studying how to turn a corner and how to make brick pieces that are hollowed out with, in fact, this slide shows you the lighting effect that we could have, the translucency, the illusion of depth that you can have, much like a Chinese screen. Working with a wonderful Japanese lighting designer series on this as well, to achieve an effect that's it's kind of like a glowing lantern in the evening. this is really our last slide. I mean, I think in architecture, nothing can really happen without pairs and pairs and pairs of hand. And every time I go on site and I took these pictures of the wonderful craftspeople who actually put these together, it's a very sort of roll up your sleeve kind of thing. So we really, as a part of the exhibit, we really went to a kind of much more micro scale from Peter and Gerhard's and Daneil's piece to Kevin's piece, and then now we're zooming in into a very, very, very intimate project. So that's really our part for tonight.
Right, thank you, Frank and Irene. This is a really nice project. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I can see that from a bigger scale with Peter's model to Kevin's scale is in your project is like you have different layer of spaces to redistribute like a flat piece of land and to make the spaces more efficient. But since I think it is like a private project, this is almost the only chance that we can see your project, right? Unless we buy our way in. And that actually leads to our subtopic for the second half, which Chou has more to share, whether Hong Kong, the most expensive city to dwell in. So, Chou?
So are we going to the second part directly?
Yeah, we're going to the second part.
Okay, good. Okay, just one moment. So I have also prepared some slides about the second topic. Is the topics of the most expensive city to dwell in. So okay, let's see. Now this is sad news. So recently, Hong Kong has been ranked again the world's least affordable city and most expensive in the world for 10 consecutive years in global survey. Actually, not just one, more than one. So this one shows you the result of some of this global survey, and in this global survey, you can see Hong Kong is on the left side is the green line. You can see the steepness of this in Hong Kong market. So compared to other countries, it's comparing to countries. So you can see from 2010, the price of the private housing actually escalating in astronomical manner compared to other major countries in the world. So, and also the price is actually in the right figure. You can see we are almost double the second, Vancouver and Sydney and Melbourne. So this is alarming, and to me it's actually absolutely not acceptable. And another survey show is also a very frightening fact is 10 years ago, we only need 12 years to buy a flat of 60 square meters. But after 10 years, now it's become 22 years. You have to work 22 years in order to be able to own a 60 square meter flat. So this is really undesirable, and I think that's causing a lot of issues in Hong Kong because people unable to buy the first home, they will go to queue along the public housing, and now the queuing of the public housing actually is more than 5 years. So it's actually a knock-on effect is you create social impact to everyone, including the underprivileged class, and we all have to suffer from that and live in poor living environment, and also we are unable to deal with the issues of aging population, etc. And then also another knock-on effect is the economic impact due to the difficulties in operating business in Hong Kong, especially for those smaller firms, etc. So the going back to our first session, so is it really a matter of increasing the land supply? Then the housing price will drop. My analysis is I don't think it will really happen as what we think. Even if we increase the land supply, the housing price would not drop drastically. It's because actually the private housing now, because of a lot of reasons like quantitative easing, low interest rate, etc. And also the private housing actually is now becoming a asset commodity. And it's actually serving dual role. One is serving the basic necessity, but actually it also has a role of allowing to keep saving, and also is kind of investment. So unless we can totally get rid of the function of the private housing serving as an asset commodity, then because of this low inflation and the quantitative easing, all this money from the US, I don't think the price will drop substantially. So perhaps the private housing would not be a way out, solve our social problem. So just looking back some data. So I would believe we need to do something, but doing something is may not be actually increasing the land supply, but actually is see how we can reinstate the subsidized housing class. If you look at this previous data, we in the past, before the millennium, we have been producing the three type of housing you can see here: private residential, and then the public housing, and in between there the yellow color is a subsidized sales rent, a substantial amount. But after due to certain reasons, and it has been stopped, and then it's not reinstated. So I think that you increase the private housing is not easy, and also the public housing also has some limitation. So how we can increase the supply of the residential flat, and is something that we should look into. And also the if we have the chance of reinstating the this class subsidized housing, I would think that this is a good opportunity to allow us to use this to solve some of our social problems, such as building an inclusive community living style, and to embrace the various people in the community, such as the aged people and also the young people. So this is our example showing how this can be done. And there are already a lot of examples in Europe and also Singapore. So how we can bring different people together, and instead of why we have to always build the residential in two extremes. One is a luxurious residential, or it has to be very basic public housing. So can there be something in the middle that can allow both group of people, including professionals, including the middle class, and also those underprivileged people to live together, helping each other with a sharing approach. Another thing that I think would be an opportunity is, which is a more tangible opportunity, is in fact in the professional institute we are just joking that now if we can extend our MTR, the $2 scheme for the elderly to go to the Greater Bay Area, perhaps we can resolve a lot of problems. So although it's just kidding, but it's realistic. So we are actually confined by the boundary, our border, and if we think across the border and out of the box, then perhaps we have a bigger opportunity and more measures to resolve the issues in Hong Kong. So the redistribution is actually not just confined in the territory of Hong Kong, but actually in a wider context. So some of these previous discussion is that's redistribution of land actually is also a redistribution of people. Would there be a possibility that the Hong Kong government can build special elderly zone or living zone that allow exchange of a better living environment and medical and elderly care service in the Greater Bay Area by giving up their, say, the public housing, or they rent the own premises, the private housing to the young people, and then free up all this resource for the more needed people to work in Hong Kong, and then they have in return get a better environment and better care in the aging service, etc. So this is something is really a possible solution. So that we could consider to look at it. So then coming, I have some thought about how we can, why actually we are not comparable to the other international cities. So something wrong with our system at the moment. If you look at other international cities, one of the issues that I have observed is actually about design. The two exhibitor, OPENUU and also we actually, they show how important actually design thinking can actually resolve a lot of issues. So if you look at the other international cities compared to Hong Kong, I think we are actually far behind because our system actually do not respect design too much. If you look at Paris, and they create this great Paris and the Greater Paris actually through good leadership, and also by, if you may not know, actually is an architect who planned this big boulevard. And recently, if you have been to New York, I basically go to New York every 5 years. Every time I go there, I see a big change. And this is actually the effort of a good leadership by the mayor with a very strong vision and also a leadership. And very important is they have a New York City Planning Department that is comprised of mainly architects and urban designers. So compared to Hong Kong, we are actually led by a group of so-called urban planner and engineers. They are not design trained. So the effect actually is very obvious. Some of this, the High Line is also a bridge, like the OPENUU. Your proposal is a very innovative use of the bridge. And also the pedestrianization of the Times Square. All these are very inspiring projects. So Sydney is also has the vision, and also Copenhagen. I don't go into detail, but our brotherhood city, Shanghai, is also doing very well. So they have a very good system of urban design and picking the right design to implement. So Singapore, I don't repeat. So is doing much better than Hong Kong. And going back to Hong Kong, the issues is redistribution of land, and actually the recent COVID situation has prompted me to just really rethink about whether the current way of re-procuring our city, is it really the right way of doing it? So this drawing actually is from the from Plan Department. They still have stick to the very traditional way of thinking. We need a CBD. So in fact, CBD to me, Central Business District, is actually a outcome of a capitalism that we believe in efficiency in business rather than the livability and the quality of the living environment. So is it really the right way? Are we doing the right way, or would that really help? If we continue to do this way, would it really help to bring a more livable city and more affordable city to us? So in recent, actually, the COVID situation bring me to rethink about this, and actually some people already warn us is this Singapore expert. So we are only doing a lot of, so he calls 50 turkeys, but we are not actually resolving the issues. We are not doing a peacock. So I would like to actually suggest is we may need to rethink the entire system and also the way how we procure a city. If we, so sorry, I'll just go. Can you see my screen? It's okay? Can you see it? Yeah. Good. So we think how we should procure a city, whether we should still stick to the traditional way of a CBD. I think the exhibitor, Gerhard and Peter, they actually bring up an interesting approach. D-Way actually is another alternative approach instead of the previous belief that most planners in Hong Kong believe that we have to stick to this type of traditional CBD mode, and then with the people commuting 2 to 3 hours from the urban sprawl and outskirts into the city to work, and that probably doesn't work. And in particular, in after this COVID situation, it demonstrates actually we have actually there's other ways to do business, and also there's a new way of living and working. And I think to answer the questions how we deal with the issues of the affordability, livability, we have to really look at the future, the new way of living and new way of working. I think in the world actually now, all this is a common phenomenon that the billionaire actually would not happen. It can happen anywhere. It doesn't need to be happen in Central. So actually, the way how we plan our working and living, I think the OPENUU did point out that actually is should be a people-centric approach rather than a business model to take it of the consider efficiency as the prime consideration. So centralized or decentralized. So I would leave this discussion to exhibitor. Back to you, Benny.
Right, thank you, Chou. Thank you for the seminar. It's very inspiring, actually. And one of those points that you have covered about urban design and redistribution of land is quite controversial, to be honest. Like a few points of it, like cross-border and utilizing the country parks. These originally seemingly purely professional sort of topics is becoming very controversial. In particular, I actually want to facilitate the discussion in different scales. First, from Peter in his urban design point of view, is that, well, Chou pointed out that we might have planned our transport system in the wrong way, such that it is occupying a lot of spaces in the city. And secondly, do we have too much of country park, like as in a city? As in for these two issues, I want each of the exhibitors to respond in different level of scale and see what they are thinking. Peter, what do you think?
I think in a way, if you look at certain kind of very successful development model that Hong Kong has borrowed partly from Japan in the 1960s, with things like Japan Railway, and you can compare that to things like MTR and the emphasis on infrastructure development, which partly mainland has also borrowed, including the land bank or the land speculation model. These have, as Joel pointed out, led to particular consequences in the way that our city is at the moment. And these have limitations. I think, both Joel and then OPENUU and all of us maybe have a similar shared point of view that we are at a limit of these things, planning for these things separately, like the Yamate example that was shown earlier in Joel's presentation, means that if you plan for these things on a separate piece of land each time, this is no longer possible within a dense city like Hong Kong. I'm not sure that it really means that we should occupy country parks, and this is also a resource for our city. But certainly being able to combine different kind of functions, no longer just having pure residential typologies. In fact, we've seen that in recent years, maybe the last 20 years, the emergence of complex podium type of buildings, such as, Elements Mall, and then on top of that, there's commercial building, there is high-end residential, there is hotel, and so forth. This is a little bit too, maybe we can actually go further with this kind of thing, in a way that means that quite different functions can be stacked up or planned together in a very three-dimensional way, so that we can actually figure out, and this links back to, things that Kevin was talking about, the sort of walkway system, or Via was talking about, Frank was talking about as well, like how can we plan for those other functions, whether they are providing livability or they're providing different amenity happening at very, very different levels in the city itself. We are partly the way there, but I think we could actually go further. And this was actually if I may just finish on this point and then give over to Gerhard and Daneil, maybe they want to add something, but this was partly the model that, let's say, the complex things that happened in the 1960s in Japan with Japan Railway, the department stores, the commercial buildings on top of those, explored in a very, very innovative way. And then Hong Kong adopted, or other Asian cities adopted. But I really think that could go further in a way. Why not have a park that is on level 30 of a building? If we're building very, very large complexes, we can actually start to consider how we can structure these things in very different ways, so that infrastructure is not, sitting on its own unusable huge amount of real estate itself. Gerhard or Daneil, you want to add anything to this?
How much time do we have?
No, feel free to add.
I think personally, I think we're asking the wrong questions. During the beginning of 2000, a lot of Dutch urban planners and spatial planners made statements saying that the Netherlands is full. And then it took Rem Koolhaas the exact amount of 60 minutes to prove them wrong by saying, well, him and his office have recalculated the total distribution of all built landscape of the Netherlands, and then found out that it's only covering 1/4 of the entire landscape. The problem I see here in Hong Kong today is actually part that, but also part a problem of the dependence of a British planning model, where planning and distribution is way more important than understanding the spatial consequences of how we live, and how that then starts expanding outwards, that impacts all forms of urban and built space. At this point, we all know this. This is somehow, you know, preaching to the choir. I feel that when we talk about planning and design, we all know that the model, the podium model, and those things don't work. But somehow the dependency on that through the financial system is the model that through which everything somehow is tied into. So the real questions, or multiple questions we need to ask, is what type of lifestyle changes do we want to see? How does this actually start impacting the way spaces are formed? How is this materializing in our daily environment? And then actually expand from that scale outwards. And then I think Jules is right by saying, you know, the planners and I'm also engineer by the Dutch system, but the engineering principle is one that is a dominant force within the spatial conceptualization of the city. So I think that there needs to be a total reversal of viewpoints here if we really want to start thinking about alternatives. And I think that is what I like specifically doing when we confront the students with these challenging questions, because the first thing that happens is we shock them. They somehow have a knee-jerk reaction, but also it takes time to warm up to these ideas and to how these things happen. I mean, one last example on this is, what I find interesting is that usually employers in Hong Kong don't like it when their employees work from home. And all of a sudden, the COVID situation has forced everyone to work from home, and now real estate is suffering because now employees are realizing they don't need the real estate to support their business operations. So how is this going to change the future model of development? Do we need another CBD or IFC? Maybe the distribution of workforce needs to happen through the entirety of the landscape. So I think those are interesting questions, or more pertinent questions we need to ask. Anyway, that's enough for me. Thank you.
That's right. I can see that when Joe shared the organization charts of the government, how they deal with planning, it's like the complete opposite of the spatial oriented approach of designing the city. Daneil, do you have anything to add?
Only briefly that I think the scenarios that Peter shared, there's something implicit in them where the way that it could be executed in terms of a different way of living is probably much more radical than it appears. The idea of a pixel city where things are uniform and it's operating under a model of planning that's very different from what we know, I think is what's kind of implied by a lot of those scenarios. And I think it starts to address what Gerhard is talking about, is that fundamentally the model of planning does not correlate as closely to how people actually live. And we're seeing this kind of, you know, top-down, centralized, metric-driven approach being questioned as our ways of using space kind of change.
Right. Kevin?
I think the educators have spoken really well about this topic. But I do agree that, you know, it really comes down to planning. And as Peter has mentioned, you know, the subway, I think, you know, was obviously taken from Japan and subterranean. So that's kind of the first level, I think, that Hong Kong has, you know, approached this planning in multiple layers. But I think what's also important to learn from is, for example, you know, I lived in Boston before I moved back. The Big Dig, that, you know, with the Big Dig, it happened and it took a long time and it took, you know, obviously it was after the fact type of planning again, similar to what could happen for Yau Ma Tei. But when these things actually happen, there are other programs that could simultaneously occur above what actually happens or below in some cases. I think in Hong Kong, same thing, you know, the new bypass that was put in linking from the western to the eastern part of Hong Kong Island. I think, you know, that's just the first step that Hong Kong has taken in that direction of a planning approach, I believe, to put things underground, to kind of alleviate what is already, you know, very densely populated in Hong Kong and kind of putting some of them underground. and I think to go above ground, as wishful as it is, you know, we've seen in some cases, for example, Elements, IFC, you know, those are kind of happening, but we also have to consider when those happen, it comes down to private versus public type of approach. All these are done by private developers. And none of this really comes from the public side, because a lot of it is just kind of pushed responsibilities kind of thrown onto the developers to kind of, you know, it's incentives for them to be able to build taller buildings, kind of have a larger GFA if they provide back to the public. But it doesn't really work in that sense, because ultimately every developer is obviously trying to gain as much as they can to try to provide as little, in some cases, back to the community, which, you know, comes down to the private and public balance, which I think is, it's a really hard kind of, I guess, fine line that you're drawing there. But, you know, ultimately what becomes the private's responsibility and what becomes public responsibility, in this case, the government. So I think there are a lot of elements that play into that. And, you know, as for kind of the parks that we have in Hong Kong, I think it's tough because, as I mentioned, in some cases, you know, we were doing landfill, which kind of damages the ecology in the underground. But in the case of, if you were to try to go into forestry and kind of have that exploited, you know, you're damaging the ecology above ground. So it's kind of a tough balance to play, is do we want more land, or do we, you know, want to preserve the environment? So I think again, those are really, you know, you could argue for both ways. But as for, you know, whether we're supposed to go into our parks, because of what, you know, I like scuba diving, you know, I like the environment as well. So I think, you know, I would rather not you know, go into kind of destroying more and creating more you know, global warming effects. So in that case, you know, I would, as you know, as you could see in our kind of proposed solution, is to really kind of go with what's existing and really build upon what has already been built.
Right. Well, certainly. Well, to us who like to hike as well, Kevin. Well, as Joe pointed out, I think actually land supply isn't the reason that is driving Hong Kong's properties price anyway. So it might imply that we actually do not need more supply of land, but more of like an approach to plan our city. For example, the Yau Ma Tei interchange, which is the entire, you know, as the footprint is as big as the entire Tai Kwu Shing, we might as well have a very creative scheme, deck over the entire interchange, and we build on top. It's like what they have been doing in Wan Chai Bypass and in West Kowloon district. But for the old crimes that they committed too early in their life, the Yau Ma Tei interchange, we can't probably demolish the entire interchange, right? So we can just stack over and, you know, do another. It would be quite profitable as well for commercially viable, because the entire, you know, Yau Ma Tei interchange, we can build a brand new Tai Kwu Shing on top. So Frank, what is your view on those two questions?
I'm not sure if I'm going to sort of have a direct kind of answer, but I mean, I think the model, that particular project that we're doing shows a couple of things that is worth maybe bringing out to discuss. The first is how much, I mean, we have to acknowledge there is a majority of development in the hands of private developers. And so the role of developers, I think a few of you have mentioned, and how they're pushing the quality of life in addition to just maxing out the GFA, that for us and the things that we're working on plays a really big part on what's happening. The particular project that we're working on is the kind of, for us, it's the kind of scale that we as a design studio are always more interested in working on. Many of you have talked about the mega sort of podium model that doesn't work anymore. And again, from experience working on ICC and on the Kowloon Station, it's a very, very challenging proposition. But the project that we just mentioned as a showcase. It's intimate, and it doesn't have a sort of big piece of podium. It is permeable at the base, and it is the best thing for us is that it is kind of a small ecosystem in itself, and that to me is something, especially in the post-COVID era, something that we all should think about. A lot more of these so-called clubhouses, they have to, in addition to provide amenities, opportunities to exercise, we now have areas for community farming. We now have areas dedicated for a conference meeting, and we have sort of working places where people actually work. That the definition of residential in itself has become, I think, more encompassing. And I think personally, I think it should be. I think Gerhard talked about the working from home scenario. I think the greatest lesson for me during the COVID time is I don't have to go to meetings so much, and people have saved so much time on public transport, whichever, I mean, all the roads and all the railways, all the congestions actually all of a sudden kind of gone. And then of course, look at retail, what's happening to people's buying habits, right? And so I think eventually, and again, in residential design, we see all these problems, right? Like now, in addition to mailboxes, I have one developer actually said, nobody receives mail anymore. So let's not do mailboxes, but have a centralized delivery location where people can actually deal with couriers. And so those kinds of patterns are all reflected in the next generation, I think, of residential design, which I think that's something, it's a worldwide situation, but I think it's really poignant for a city like Hong Kong to think about a lot.
Right, all right, thank you, Frank. Well, it looks like the last slide of Joe asking centralizing or decentralizing. Today, our verdict is pointing towards decentralizing then. Well, everybody has their own opinion on that, I'm sure. But later on, if you want to revisit this webinar, you can log on to the our social media. It will be, we have recorded the entire session. Feel free to fill in our feedback form, which is appearing in our chat room, and subscribe to our monthly webinars. Our next webinar is quite interesting. The next one is COVID-19 series. It's about social distancing. I'm sure under this, 1.5 meter social distancing in terms of space, it affects a lot of different sort of spatial rules or spatial arrangement inside, the typical building. And obviously, as a designer, there are some different considerations as well. So stay tuned. The next month webinar would be around the end of October, and I believe we have the Deputy Director Winnie Ho to be our guest speaker. So thank you all exhibitors and our speaker Joe.
Yes.
Thank you very much for all of your insights. I believe we have learned a lot tonight, at least I have. I will see you guys next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.